Hi everyone, and welcome to Protocol 36, and in today's video, we'll be continuing the video series that we started last week with 2002 Spider-Man, to the Amazing Spider-Man duology, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and of course the two solo MCU Spider-Man films so far, leading up to the release of Spider-Man No Way Home, where we will be looking at the Spider-Man comics that the filmmakers took inspiration from when making those films, looking at the overall story, character moments, visual references, and more. For today, of course, we'll be doing Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2. Beware though, I'm not going to be talking about how well those stories were adapted on the big screen, just pointing at specific comics that were looked at when making those films, as the video series is more so a celebration of both the comics and the books. So before we get started, if at any point you enjoyed this video, I really appreciate if you could drop a like, as that would really help out the channel. Thank you. Now, let's get started. As most of you already know, Spider-Man 2 is an adaptation of the Amazing Spider-Man issue 50, titled Spider-Man No More, known to be one of the most iconic and beloved Spider-Man comics ever, as it's a story about Peter Parker quitting being Spider-Man, as being a superhero took a massive toll on his life. The film took so much from that specific issue, with not only straight up ripping the most iconic panel on the big screen, but also little things like Peter not being there for his friends, his grades declining in university, even having Dr. Connors almost saying the exact same line in the comics, where I believe Miles Warren is the one to say that. J. Jonah Jameson also gets the Spider-Man costume after Peter dumps it in the trash, which then he becomes extremely happy and lets the world know that Spider-Man has quit. During the comics, it was a little boy who gave the costume to Jonah in order to get reward he sent out, while in the movie it's a homeless man who tries selling it to him. Just like in the comics, crime rates has also risen, and Peter quitting also led to Kingpin to make his first appearance and started to make massive moves now that Spider-Man is gone. Even though Kingpin obviously doesn't appear in Spider-Man 2, we do see the consequences of New York no longer having Spider-Man around to protect them, and we even get to see how crime has risen by 75%. When it comes to Peter Parker losing his powers, while he doesn't lose his powers in issue 50, there has been a few occasions where he has in the Leah Dicko run, specifically the Amazing Spider-Man issue 12, as that was a story where Peter had a serious flu which weakened him and made him lose his powers temporarily. I believe Sam Raimi also said that that's the comic he took the idea from, which also had Doc Ock in that story. But there's also one moment in the Amazing Spider-Man Annual 1 where Peter did lose his powers due to depression, hating himself and wanting a normal life, which is exactly why he loses his powers in the film. After Peter quits, he of course tries to live a normal life and is pretty much having a good time, with Aunt May feeling better, and was also able to spend time with Gwen Stacy too, who both of them share strong feelings for each other. Even though Aunt May wasn't unwell in Spider-Man 2, we do see Peter spend more time with Mary Jane, who both of them also share strong feelings for each other. Just that MJ is getting ready to marry for a good portion of the film, until of course she bailed. There was also a panel where Peter was hearing about a robbery and tries to suit up, but remembers that he doesn't have his costume anymore, which of course Spider-Man 2 took that moment directly from the panel, and even had Peter saving someone in his civilian clothes, after finding out that an officer was getting attacked by two thugs, which also reminds me of that scene where Peter in his civilian clothes was saving a little girl from a burning building, showing that whether or not Peter has his costume or even his powers, he will always be a hero no matter what, and that he will always be Spider-Man. When later on he gets his costume, Peter gets his suit almost the exact same way as he does in the comics, breaking into Jameson's office, stealing the costume back, which then makes Jameson tell the world that Spider-Man has returned. So it's pretty clear that out of any other comic book, Spider-Man 2 took the most from the Amazing Spider-Man issue 50. So much so that Spider-Man No More was one of the titles considered for the film, until it was just decided to just call it Spider-Man 2. In the film, MJ becomes a successful actress, which she obviously talks about how she wanted to be an actress in the first film, even starting to audition. But in Spider-Man 2 and even a bit in Spider-Man 3, we actually get to see that, which of course was some of her most well-known professions in the comics. When it comes to Dr. Otto Octavius, aka Dr. Octopus, being portrayed by the brilliant Alfred Molina, who is one of the actors set to return in Spider-Man No Way Home as the Raimi iteration of the character. The main comment Raimi and his team looked at and used when making their own version of the character was of course the Amazing Spider-Man issue 3, which was the first introduction to the character, also exploring his origin story and how he becomes Spider-Man's most dangerous and iconic foes, which the film took heavily from, like having Otto be the one to design the 4 mechanical arms to help him control radioactive substance at the Atomic Research Center where he used to work, until it went horribly wrong, leading to the mechanical arms being fused to his body, ending up at the hospital, which is what happened in Spider-Man 2 with some minor differences, like losing the inhibitor chip, which helped him control the arms, and losing them, which led to the arms amplifying his desire, which was of course finishing his life's work, and of course that he didn't work at the Atomic Research Center, but instead had his own lab where Oscorp funded his projects. The arms in the films were also created for similar reasons, in order to control radiation from a safe distance, though of course in the film it was of course control the fusion reaction in order to create a fusion sun to help create cheap and renewable energy for everyone. But it's clear that's the main inspiration when it comes to Doc Ock's backstory, which makes a lot of sense. When it comes to his wife Rosie Octavius, even though she's the original character created for the film, Otto in one point in the comics did actually fall in love with a woman named Mary Alice and even got engaged with her. But thanks to his overprotective mother, he reluctantly called the entire thing off, which led to him having a cold heart. So in the comics he also had a love interest, but of course it was with a completely different character. But both relationships ended pretty badly for both versions. Even though this has nothing to do with the story and that it could very well be a coincidence, Octavius has often smoked in the comics, though of course he wasn't really known to do it all that much, but sometimes, which they also had him smoking in the film when working on the second fusion reactor. Spider-Man 2 also loosely took an important moment from the Amazing Spider-Man issue 38 from the 1999 run, written by J.M. Straczynski and art by John Romita Jr., which was published in 2002, where after Aunt May finds out that Peter is Spider-Man, they have a conversation together. And even though it's just them two talking, the conversation that they have is really amazing in my opinion. But the moment that the filmmakers most likely took from the comic was when Aunt May also felt responsible for Ben's death, because she describes that before he was killed, they had a small argument and Uncle Ben wanted to take a walk because he didn't want to have another argument with his wife. And in the film, of course, she mentions multiple times that she felt responsible for his death by letting Uncle Ben take Peter to the quote-unquote library. It was also in that same issue where Peter admits that he was responsible for Ben's death, but of course letting the mugger go, which is exactly what Peter does in the film, eventually leading to Aunt May to forgive her nephew and tell him that she loves him, both in the comic and the film. Even though Aunt May doesn't find out that Peter is Spider-Man, but it was hinted at, with her giving her nephew the hero speech. Quickly jumping into Spider-Man 2.1, which is an extended version of the film, we have J. Jonah Jameson hilariously dressed up as Spider-Man. Now, even though he doesn't do that in the comics, I believe this was to show how jealous Jameson was of Spider-Man, which was one of the reasons why he hated him and kept publicly accusing him of numerous crimes in the source material. There's also, of course, a moment where Harry unmasks Spider-Man to find out it's Peter, and even though the way Harry finds out in the comics is different, both instances does ultimately lead him to becoming the next Green Goblin, or in the case of the Raimi movies, the New Goblin. And in that same issue, which is the Amazing Spider-Man issue 135, Harry also goes to Norman's hideout, where he puts all of his goblin tech and suits, which we also see happen towards the ending of the film, but of course it was a secret room instead. In the comics, Harry is also addicted to drugs, but the filmmakers didn't really take that when writing and developing their own Harry Osborn. They did kind of replace that with him having a drinking problem, while still making him desperately try to get revenge on Spider-Man, after thinking that he killed his father in the first film, which was also similar to the ending of the Amazing Spider-Man issue 122. If This Be My Destiny was also loosely taken from Spider-Man 2, with of course giving Doc Ock his own base in a warehouse or a lair, and Peter lifting an extremely heavy object. But that's where the similarities end, to be honest. However, this is everything I've got and could find when it comes to the Spider-Man comics that inspired Spider-Man 2. If there's anything I've missed, please politely let me know in the comments down below, and also let me know your thoughts too. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Twitter. If you enjoyed this video, please like, and want more, subscribe. To begin, Protocol 36.